It usually happens when you are, well, feeling perfectly fine. You might be at a networking event or maybe a dinner party with friends of friends.
Right, you're just existing, minding your own business.
Exactly. You are holding a perfectly acceptable beverage, thinking you have this whole social interaction thing completely under control. And then the person across from you smiles, leans in, and drops the most terrifying, brain-crashing, seven-word sequence in the English language.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say.
They say, so tell me a bit about yourself.
Yeah, it genuinely acts like a circuit breaker for the human brain. You can almost hear the gears grinding to a halt.
It really does.
People just suddenly forget everything they have ever done in their entire lives.
You forget your hobbies, you forget your career. I mean, for a split second, you might even forget your own middle name.
Yep.
And today, we are going on a mission to decode the psychology and really the strategy behind this exact moment. We're taking a duck dive into a transcript from an English learning video by a channel called Speak English with Class.
Which is a great resource, by the way.
It is. But, okay, let's unpack this because on the surface, this is a lesson designed for English learners, right? Like at the B2 to C1 level.
Right. The stated goal is just to help non-native speakers navigate daily conversations.
Yeah, but as you read through the source material, you quickly realize the psychology of human connection. It reveals it's universally applicable. I mean, it applies to anyone, anywhere, who has ever frozen up when asked to describe their own life.
It really highlights a universal truth. The ultimate goal of an introduction isn't about sounding grammatically perfect or, you know, presenting a flawless, optimized resume to the world.
Nobody wants to hear a resume at a dinner party.
Exactly. The goal is simply to give people something human to connect with. And whether you're speaking your first language or your fifth, navigating that human connection is what actually dictates how the conversation is going to go.
Right. So let's start with the anatomy of the panic itself, because I've always found it strange that this specific question causes such a severe mental block.
It is weird when you think about it.
Right, because you are the world expert on you. You've been living in your own head your entire life. So why do we instantly feel like we're doing it wrong the second we are asked to summarize it?
Well, the source material points out that a major part of the problem is just the sheer lack of parameters. The question feels entirely too big.
Yeah, it's so broad.
When someone says, "Tell me about yourself," there is no clear starting point. I mean, do you start chronologically with your childhood? Do you talk about your current job, your family?
Unfulfilled dreams.
Right, the cognitive load of having to sort through decades of life experience in a fraction of a second is just paralyzing.
It really is like being dropped into the middle of the ocean without a compass. There is simply too much space, and you have absolutely no idea which direction to swim.
That's a great way to put it.
And there's actually a brilliant anecdote in the source about this. It's about a native English speaker, someone who literally talks into a microphone for a living, who gets asked this exact question and completely freezes.
Oh, yeah. I loved that part. He just totally blanks.
He ends up rambling about his job, the fact that he drinks way too much coffee, and then eventually he starts talking about his cat.
His cat named Gerald.
Yes, Gerald. And he describes Gerald as, wait, let me get the quote, very serious, very professional, very judgmental.
Which is a highly specific, funny detail.
Yeah,
But it perfectly illustrates the erratic places the brain goes when it crashes.
it really does.
What's fascinating here is the underlying psychological mechanism of feeling self-conscious. The source breaks this down beautifully. Well, when someone asks you to tell them about yourself, you are suddenly tasked with doing two exhausting cognitive processes at the exact same time. First, you're trying to formulate sentences and physically speak.
Right, just the act of talking.
But second, you are simultaneously judging yourself for what you're saying in real time.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you're listening to your own words as they leave your mouth and thinking, am I rambling? Am I boring them? Do I sound incredibly arrogant right now?
Precisely. You are playing both the performer on stage
Uh-huh.
and the worst, most hypercritical audience member in the front row.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. The working memory in your brain simply cannot handle running both of those intense processes smoothly. The material makes it really clear that this slightly panicked, nervous feeling is a completely normal physiological response.
So it's not a vocabulary problem.
No, or a lack of social skills either. It's a human psychology problem born from an unstructured question.
Okay, so if the panic comes from the question being too broad and our brains crashing because there are no boundaries, we need to build our own boundaries.
Exactly. We have to create the structure.
So where does the source suggest we actually draw those lines so we can answer the question without sounding like a malfunctioning robot?
The source actually contrasts a bad introduction with a good one to show exactly how to restructure this moment. The version most people default to, the one we're implicitly taught in school or, use on formal job applications, sounds something like this.
Let's hear it.
Hello, my name is Jake. I am 32 years old. I left in London.
Ugh, that feels like reading a Wikipedia page.
Right.
It's just a list of cold, hard facts.
It is stiff and robotic, but more importantly, from a conversational standpoint, it gives the other person absolutely nothing to react to.
That's true.
If you say, I am 32 and live in London, the other person can really only nod and say, cool. It effectively shuts the conversation down.
It's a dead end. So how do we fix it?
To fix this, the material suggests a much better formula. You state your name, add one sentence about your background, and then, this is the key, include one small human detail.
That human detail seems to be the linchpin of the whole strategy.
It really is.
There's an example in the transcript of an Italian expat introducing herself, right? She says she grew up in Italy but has been living abroad for about 6 years. And she adds that this means she spends an inordinate amount of time missing Italian bread.
Yeah, that small addition changes the entire dynamic of the introduction.
It's warm, it's slightly self-deprecating, and it's deeply personal without, crossing the line into oversharing.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. A good introduction isn't handing someone a finalized, locked safe of your life's data.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. It's tossing them a ball they can easily catch. It's dropping a trail of breadcrumbs. A resume introduction is like that locked safe. The other person just stares at it, unsure how to get in.
Because there's no way to interact with it.
But when you mention missing Italian bread, you are giving their brains something obvious and easy to pick up. They can pull that thread by asking, oh, where are you living now? What kind of bread specifically? Have you found any good bakeries around here?
You've offered them multiple, easy pathways to keep the interaction alive.
If you're listening to this on your commute right now, think about your own standard introduction or even your LinkedIn bio. Are you handing people a locked safe? Or are you leaving a breadcrumb?
And that breadcrumb strategy ties directly into how the source recommends talking about your broader background too.
How does that work?
Instead of delivering a rigid timeline of events like, I studied in this city, then I worked in that city, and now I live here,
Right.
they suggest framing it more organically.
Okay.
For instance, I grew up in Alexandria, Egypt, studied engineering, and ended up in Dubai a few years ago.
I noticed that specific phrasing in the transcript. Ended up. Why is that particular phrase so effective?
Well, the phrase, I ended up, is powerful because it acknowledges a shared human reality, which is that life rarely goes to a perfect plan.
That is very true.
Very few of us had a rigid 10-year blueprint that we executed flawlessly. Saying, I ended up signals to the listener that you are adaptable. It subtly communicates that you're navigating the unpredictable currents of life just like they are. And that immediately reduces the intimidation factor.
It makes you relatable.
Yeah, exactly. The source proves that a first impression doesn't need to be spectacular. You don't need to present yourself as some master strategist who conquered every goal. It just needs to be genuine.
I buy that. Acknowledging the unpredictability of life definitely makes you more approachable. But let's raise the stakes a bit.
Let's do it.
Once you get past the basic introduction, you inevitably hit the phase of the conversation where people want to know about your personality. Someone asks, how would you describe yourself? And almost instinctively, we retreat into these awful, hollow cliches.
Oh, the dreaded corporate jargon.
Oh,
I am a hard worker. I am very passionate. I am a people person.
A people person.
The worst.
Seriously, if you are listening, think about how many times you have heard someone claim to be a people person, or how many times you have used it yourself. It means absolutely nothing.
It really doesn't. The source actually points out that these phrases have been repeated so often, they have induced a kind of cognitive blindness.
We hear them, but we don't visualize anything.
Exactly.
So how do we describe our actual quirks and personalities without falling back on generic templates?
The secret here is heavily rooted in the classic rule of storytelling, which is show, don't tell. If you want to communicate that you are a funny or lighthearted person, don't just declare, "I'm funny."
Because that just forces the listener to take your word for it.
Right. Instead, the source suggests describing a scenario. You might say, "I'm the kind of person who makes little jokes when the room feels too serious."
Oh, that is a massive difference. That immediately paints a visual scene in my mind.
You can see it, right?
Yeah, I can picture you in a tense boardroom, intentionally cutting the tension.
It shows your personality in action. The material actually highlights specific functional phrases that force you into this storytelling mode.
Yeah.
Phrases like, "I tend to be."
Like, I tend to overthink things.
Exactly. Or, "I'm the kind of person who," as in, "I'm the kind of person who makes a highly specific Spotify playlist for absolutely every occasion."
I know a few people like that.
Right. It replaces empty labels with vivid, relatable behavior.
And the source applies this same logic to talking about hobbies, right?
Mhm.
It draws a pretty sharp distinction between saying I like and I'm passionate about.
Yes, saying "I like music" is passive. Everyone likes music.
Hmm.
But saying you are passionate about something signals to the listener that this activity holds significant emotional weight for you.
But again, you have to show it, not just tell it.
Precisely. The source provides a fantastic example. Instead of just stating a love for music, the speaker describes a specific tactile ritual.
The record store one.
Yeah. He talks about spending his weekends going to small, dusty music shops, scouring the bins for old records he has never heard before.
The deliberate act of choosing one, taking it home, and just sitting with it.
It gives the hobby color and texture.
Another example from the source is a speaker explaining how they got into photography. They don't just say, I take photos. They explain that they got into it completely by accident because a friend lent them a camera for a trip, and they just never really gave it back.
It's a great little story.
But, okay, I have to stop and push back on this a little bit.
Go ahead.
Aren't we supposed to present our most polished, professional selves when we meet new people? Especially in a networking scenario.
That is the common assumption, yes.
Sharing that you're a bit of a mess or that you're an overthinker or that you basically stole your friend's camera, doesn't that seem completely counterintuitive? Why on earth would we voluntarily hand over our flaws to a stranger?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it all comes down to the psychological concept of status threat.
Status threat.
Yeah. When you present a flawless, highly curated, perfect version of your life, the listener's brain subconsciously goes into a defensive, comparative mode.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
They start measuring their own messy, chaotic reality against your polished highlight reel. It creates an invisible psychological wall.
Because if you are perfect, they feel pressure to suddenly prove that they are perfect too.
Exactly. Perfection actually repels connection. Nobody genuinely connects with a flawless entity. We connect with human beings, and humans are inherently flawed.
So sharing those quirks is actually a strategy.
Yes. By admitting a tiny imperfection like the fact that your cat is highly judgmental, or that you overthink emails, or that you accidentally kept a borrowed camera, you disarm their defenses.
You signal to their brain, I am safe. I'm not trying to outrank you.
Exactly. You are lowering the drawbridge.
I see the logic there. Sharing a minor quirk is like a low-stakes form of vulnerability. It warms up the room. But let's pivot to something much harder.
The future.
Right, because if the conversation goes well, you might hit the absolute minefield of future ambitions and career goals.
Oh, yeah. That's what people really freeze up.
You can't just rely on a cute, messy anecdote about a stolen camera when someone asks where you see yourself in 5 years. How does this concept of authenticity apply to high-stakes topics without making you sound entirely unmoored?
Well, talking about goals is terrifying because it requires a much higher degree of vulnerability. You are exposing what you actively desire.
And immediately, that hypercritical internal voice kicks in again.
What if I fail? What if this person judges me for aiming too high or aiming too low?
The source dissects just how heavy some goal statements can be. It uses the example. My goal is to be a millionaire by 30.
Which is an incredibly intense thing to say to a stranger.
When someone drops a statement like that in a conversation, it feels like an ultimatum. It is an immense amount of pressure on the speaker, but it also puts a strange pressure on the speaker, but it also puts a strange pressure on the listener. Like, how are they supposed to respond to that rigidity?
It is rigid, and honestly, it often comes across as performative rather than authentic.
So what's the alternative?
The source suggests softening these high-stakes declarations with more active, process-oriented language. Instead of a rigid endpoint, you use phrases like, I'm working towards, or something I really want to do one day.
Or even, I'm at a point where I want to.
Exactly.
I'm at a point where I want to. I really like that framing. It implies evolution and growth. It acknowledges the journey you are on rather than just demanding a result.
And the material also emphasizes the absolute necessity of attaching a why to your goals.
Right, because a goal without a why is just a hollow metric.
If you say, I want to start a podcast, that is information, but it isn't a connection.
But if you say, I want to start a podcast because I love the idea of creating a space that helps people feel less alone in their struggles, that completely shifts the gravity of the statement.
It changes everything. You are giving the listener the underlying emotional reason behind the goal. It invites them to connect with your motivation, even if they have no personal interest in podcasts themselves.
It's about putting yourself out there, as the source phrases it, but it brings up an incredibly tricky balance that I think a lot of people struggle with.
Which is?
How do you come across as ambitious and confident about these goals without sounding arrogant? So, what does this all mean? Based on the source's breakdown, it seems to me that the true difference between confidence and arrogance boils down to curiosity.
That's a great observation.
Arrogant people suck all the oxygen out of the room. They make listeners slowly look for the exit because the conversation is just a monologue. But confident people, on the other hand, make room for others. They state their goal, but they remain curious about the person across from them.
This raises an important question, though. What does true confidence actually look like in practice?
We're usually told it means being fearless.
Right. We are often conditioned to think that confidence means having absolute certainty, having all the answers, and being entirely unshakable.
Which is impossible.
Exactly. But the source synthesizes a profoundly different and honestly much more accessible definition. It states that confidence is not the absence of imperfection. It is continuing despite it.
Continuing despite the imperfection, that really reframes the entire concept of self-assurance.
It means you do not need to have your entire life figured out to sound confident. Being able to look at someone and say, I'm not totally sure how I'm going to get there yet, but I want to move in this direction, is actually the ultimate sign of a grounded, humble person.
And it redefines being humble too, doesn't it?
Yes, it isn't about putting yourself down or pretending you aren't skilled. Being humble is simply the ability to say, I have worked hard to get to this point, and I still have a massive amount left to learn.
That is the exact balance we're all trying to strike. You can take pride in what you have built. You know, you can say, I'm really proud of this project I'm working on, without claiming you are the undisputed master of your field.
Right.
By acknowledging what you don't know, you leave room for growth. And crucially, you leave room for the other person's expertise and experience to exist in the conversation with you.
And ultimately, that is the version of yourself you want to present. Clear, warm, genuine, and grounded. Confident enough to drop a few breadcrumbs about your real story, but humble enough to follow the breadcrumbs they offer in return.
Which brings us right back to our original mission today. We wanted to extract the actual formulas that transform a paralyzing social question into a genuine connection.
And I think we found them.
We really did. What we found in this English learning material is practically a masterclass in human psychology. Whether you are an English learner trying to find the precise vocabulary, or a native speaker who just gets severe stage fright at a dinner party, the underlying secret is exactly the same.
You do not need to deliver a perfectly optimized, memorized speech.
No, you just need to provide a few real phrases, a few honest details, and have the courage to show up as a slightly messy human being rather than a walking resume.
It does make you wonder about the broader implications of all this, though.
How so?
Well, if genuine connection truly relies on our shared messy humanity, how much of our everyday social anxiety simply comes from trying to present a completely finished version of ourselves to the world?
Oh, that's a brilliant point.
What would happen to our stress levels if, instead of pretending to be an immaculate final product, we just admitted to each other that we're all just fascinating works in progress?
A fascinating work in progress. I think every single person listening can relate to that. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the art of the introduction. We hope breaking down these psychological mechanisms gives you the tools to put your real, unfiltered self out there. So the next time you are holding that perfectly acceptable beverage and someone looks at you and says, tell me about yourself, you don't need to panic. Just drop a breadcrumb and let the conversation begin.